Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you. I'm Saranjana Gupta. I'm from the Huairou Commission, and today I'll be the facilitator of this discussion focused on connecting local priorities to global policies, scaling up locally led adaptation. Today's discussion is focused on the idea that many grassroots women's groups in Southeast Asia and all over the world are actually engaged in solving local problems and addressing the many challenges they face as a result of climate change. Their actions are actually helping them protect the communities from the worst impact of disasters. The question really is, how do we scale up these actions? Some scaling up is already occurring because of the work of grassroots organizations themselves who are transferring their initiatives across groups horizontally. Some scaling up is occurring because of collaborations with local government. But in order to accelerate adaptation and build resilience at the pace that we really need it to work, we need to do much more. And in that context, we're having this discussion to hear from grassroots organizations as well as from policymakers. What can we learn from one another and what are the next steps we need to take? So we hope that this discussion will give us some insights into this, and we hope that this will not be the last discussion with you, but something that we can pick up again in the next few months in order to consolidate our analysis as we drive forward on locally led adaptation. And big thanks to GRP. This event is part of the Southeast Asian Resilience Hub. We have several virtual hubs that are being organized in conjunction with COP26. Today is the second day of COP26, and we'll be sending our insights and messages and recommendations to the Blue Zone, where government negotiators are present at COP26. And so thank you to GRP, the Global Resilience Partnership, and our partners, the Asian Development Bank, who helped us put together this panel. And we have a very exciting panel here today. Let's just show you quickly the slide of panelists. The Zoom protocol, okay, the panelists first. So we have, you can see there that we have grassroots organizations and NGOs who represent the most vulnerable groups most affected by disasters and climate change. They'll be speaking first and giving you some idea of the kind of work that they're doing on the ground and how they're trying to scale that up. And we also have Pak Yoga, who's from the government of Indonesia, and Yukiko from the Asian Development Bank, who will be commenting on this and providing an institutional perspective that guides us on how policymakers perceive these grassroots-led actions and what are their recommendations for scaling up these actions. In the meantime, do keep the chat active because we may not have much time to go into questions and comments. We will try and have a little time if our speakers are all staying within their time limits, then we can perhaps have some discussion, but please feel free to use the chat to make comments on what the speakers are saying, to come up with recommendations and to ask questions. We encourage the participants and the panelists also to answer in the chat if they can. And with that, let's just go through the Zoom protocol very quickly. The Zoom is being recorded. If you notice any offensive content, please notify Sugar, Iron, or Buddy. They can also help you if you're having technical problems. And we recommend you close all non-essential applications on your device so that your Zoom works well. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking and use the chat box for comments and questions. And with that, I think welcome once again, and let's go to the panelists. I'm going to start by calling upon Amie, Debora Diane Utami. She's the program manager at YAKKUM Emergency Unit. They've been working with communities on disaster for many years, but their more recent work is with grassroots women's groups. She's going to share first. After that, she has Ibu Roniatun with her. We'll have a brief video on Ibu Roniatun's remarks, but we'll come back to her for her recommendations. As you're writing in the chat, think about where investment in scaling up local action is most needed and how you think that that investment should be shaped and designed. Thanks very much. Over to you, Amie. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Suranjana. So thank you for this opportunity to share our learning when we're working together with the women group in Indonesia. So since 2015, YAKKUM Emergency Unit with the support from Huairou Commissions has committed to facilitate more than 60 women groups in Indonesia, both in urban and rural setting, strengthening their leadership and also connecting them directly with the governments, the private sectors, university, CSO network, and also the other network of women group, either in local, regional, or global levels. So we work together with the women group as partner, in which we started by strengthening the group itself or establishing the group in the community, raising their awareness and understanding of the climate change impact in the community and also disaster risk. And together we identified and analyzed their perspective on the priority of risk, challenges they face, the root cause, and then the women group will decide on the priority of actions they want to initiate. So based on these discussions, the women group then formulated a proposal of priority of actions to get access for funding. We also support the women group with the flexible funding. So through this small funding, the women can demonstrate their resilience action to reduce disaster risk and also adapt to the changing climate. The initiative is not only to reduce the risk, but also related to the livelihood and environment conservation, such as how they make sure that the livelihood can be more diverse and then resilient and also sustainable despite of this changing climate. And the interesting part is that the initiative that they proposed usually not only benefited the group itself, but also benefit the family and also the wider community. So how can this happen? The women usually have a role as a health carers in the community. So they understand the community better. They know whose family have people with disability, children under 5, or how many pregnant women in the community or those with chronic disease. They also know where they live. Even during this pandemic COVID-19, where community activity is restricted, there's so many evidence that shows that women find a way to support those in need, even involve them in the activity. And oftentimes the women also assist the village field officer and contribute to identify and also verify community member to get access for government program, particularly for poverty alleviation programs. So with this background, scaling up the locally led resilient practices is possible if there is a long-term commitment from the governments, the CSO, and other stakeholders to build and nurture the partnerships with the local actors, in this case, the women group. So the partnership shouldn't be seen as one-time process, linear or contract basis between the donors and the recipient of fund, but more as a means to continuously learning together, to listen to each other and also develop and refine the solutions together. So in the process, there might be trial and error, but that part of the learning journey that should be documented. So you will hear from Ibu Roniatun from Ngalang village in Gunung Kidul on how the women group reduce disaster risk and adapt to this changing climate, and also how they scale up the resilience practices through a formal mechanism of local development planning process.
Thank you so much, Amie. In this very short time, you've given us very, very pointed remarks that highlight the importance of women setting their own priorities. Sugar is going to play the video of Ibu Roniatun's remarks, but while she does that, I'm just summarizing a couple of points that stood out. So women as health carders and their ability to identify vulnerable people, the importance of flexible resources, long-term commitment, and their ability to support the government to deliver on poverty programs, social protection programs in a more effective, efficient manner, which we saw also during the COVID crisis. Yeah, let's hear from Roniatun.
My name is Roniatun from Ngalang Village, Gedang Sari, Gunung Kidul. I am a secretary of Mantili Tangguh Women Group. My village has several disaster risks such as flood, landslide, wind whirl, and drought. Initially, we mitigated those disasters by establishing a crops barn, but then there was a crop failure. Therefore, we came up with a solution to develop grocery store. The surrounding community could buy the goods from our store and crops barn in credit or after they harvested their farm. In its development, we learned from the other women groups that waste management was particularly useful. So we started to have waste management as well, and it's proven to provide additional income for not only our members but also surrounding communities. In 2017, flood and landslide happened and blocked the access to our village. Our group managed to contribute basic food such as rice to support public kitchen until the road cleared and accessible. At the time, due to our contribution, village government started to pay consideration on our activities. Furthermore, as a part of Village Disaster Risk Reduction Forum, we contributed also in the discussion on how to mitigate flood and landslide by planting perennial trees and fruits on the prone areas. Village government monitored our activities and acknowledged that our activities are beneficial to all community members. We participated also in various village competitions in sub-district levels to prove our achievement. Our women group then was invited to village annual budgeting meeting for development planning or Musren Bank Desa. During that meeting, we can voice our concern and propose village budget allocation for women and children programs. We wrote down our activities proposal and presented before the village government and meeting participants. The arguments in the meeting were not always run smoothly. However, we proved that our activities benefited not only our members but also all village communities. One of the supports that we received was additional capital and room for our grocery store. Even though not all our proposed activities received budget allocation, we now have more equal position in delivering our messages. Before, although we were invited to the meeting, we only participated as a passive listener and served snacks. Now we could join the discussion and voiced our messages. The acceptance of local government has put new meaning in our participation during village development budgeting planning, and it has provided opportunities for us to access programs or have collaboration with other parties such as NGOs, universities, faith-based organizations, and even private sectors. My name is Sonia.
Okay, thank you so much. That was great. And what I get out of that is that even while there is a very progressive decentralization program and inclusive decentralization program in Indonesia, some investment has to be made in helping groups who have been traditionally excluded from public planning and decision making, to give them the capacity and confidence to come in and influence the local planning process. Ibu Roniatun, let's go to you for your recommendation. Over to you, Amie and Roniatun.
Terima kasih. Di sini kami mempunyai 2 rekomendasi, yaitu yang pertama, lebih banyak kesempatan untuk kelompok perempuan dalam mengambil keputusan ataupun memutuskan kegiatan-kegiatan prioritas untuk mengambil dukungan dana dari pemerintah untuk sesuai dengan kebutuhan prioritas kelompok, sesuai dengan resiko-resiko bencana yang ada di desa kami. Terus selanjutnya yaitu kesempatan bagi kami untuk memiliki akses kontrol dan mengambil keputusan atas sumber daya baik material maupun non-material, melakukan kegiatan-kegiatan ketangguhan dan memperluasnya. Rekomendasi yang kedua yaitu lebih banyak lagi kesempatan bagi kelompok perempuan dalam mengambil keputusan, termasuk dalam memutuskan rekomendasi yang kedua yaitu banyak kegiatan-kegiatan pelatihan, pendampingan untuk kelompok perempuan, bukan hanya terkait kepemimpinan, tapi juga bagaimana sumber daya baik keuangan maupun non keuangan supaya lebih transparan dan mempunyai lebih banyak kesempatan untuk mengakses dukungan dana maupun lainnya dari pemerintah atau pihak lain, dan menyederhanakan penyajian pelaporan administrasi supaya bisa dimengerti lebih mudah kepada kelompok perempuan tersebut.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to summarize the top 2 recommendations and put the rest in the chat. Thanks, though. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Amie.
Okay, so the recommendations by Roniatun, there is 2 recommendations. The first one is to provide more opportunity for the women to involve actively in the decision making, to decide on the priority of actions they want to initiate based on the risk mapping and the resource available. And also the second recommendation is about the capacity strengthening. It's not only related to leadership, but also financial management and accountability. So they can be more transparent and accountable, and also more importantly, to simplify the reporting mechanism so it can be well understood by the women groups as well.
Okay, so very concrete, more capacity building, include system strengthening, help women account for money so that they can manage more money. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next speaker now. From Cambodia, Urban Poor Women Development, we have Sina here. Sina, please go ahead. Thank you. Go ahead, Sina.
Thank you, Rajana. Nice to meet you. And good morning, everyone. My name is Sina from Cambodia. I'm program manager and also Huairou Commission member. And let me say something very short about UPWD. UPWD established in 1997, registered in 1998. And in the first time, UPWD were just only a few group, maybe around 10 or 15 members in the community, because in Cambodia it's very hard to organize women to participate in the community because culture or habit of the women. So a year and a year we increase into many community in urban area. But in the meantime, we also have strategy for phasing out. For example, when the community become ownership, we move on to work with another zone. And currently, we work with certified community in urban Phnom Penh with 2,468 direct family direct beneficiary. And UPWD focus on 4 projects. One is community capacity development by providing community like conduct meeting, support community for develop planning, and prioritize issue to the and submit to the local level for commune investment plan, and also working with the land right to facilitate community on advocacy of the land registration and stop eviction or fair compensation. And another part, we also working with network for develop policy called policy justice policy for all, and make community movement for land right, because here land is become like booming price, so it many land grabbing or dispute with the land. Yeah. And almost poor people do not have land title because even they live from after Pol Pot regime, but the government not pay attention to provide the land title to them. When the company or Chinese company or any project from the government, they go to take their land, and many community remove without fair compensation. Yes, and other project we also support.
Sorry, Sina, I'm going to interrupt you here. Can you tell us, have you been successful in helping communities access their land rights? Can you tell us how long it's taken you and what have you managed to do for communities in relation to adaptation and building their resilience?
Yeah, because like the project is linked together, like community organizing to the land right or to the disaster reduction or food security. But I would like to highlight for the success story of the land right. We facilitate for community for a long time to develop the community mapping, profiling, and negotiate with different stakeholders like municipality, Ministry of Land Management for land registration. One case, we advocacy for 9 years to get the land title. So 3 community success with to get land title finally, that direct benefit to the almost 200 family in those areas. That in the land is not the land is called excluded zone. So the government not allowed to get the land title, but through the advocacy for a long time and very strong women group, they success at the end, and the land become a good price. And but they do not sell their land because they say that the land is their life. They keep their land for survive and in stay for like I can say for forever for their children or something. And they some family after they get land title, they can use the land title to get the money from the bank with the low interest, and they feel stable, and they start to improve their community by road repairing, drainage repairing, connecting electricity, and house like repairing house. So everyone is happy to get that, and so they spend that very small properly to innovate and to design their home. Now we can see the beautiful house in those areas. And many people very happy with that project.
Thank you so much, Sina. Thank you so much. I have to stop you here just in the interest of time, but please feel free to put the rest of your remarks if you want to add anything in the chat, and we can also come back to you maybe if we have the time. But I think Sina's example is really important because it draws attention to the long-term work that civil society movements and women's groups on the ground and local communities have been doing on issues like land tenure and land rights with the urban poor. Not only does it take a long time, but I think communities are also bringing the issue of land tenure, which is very important, into disaster reduction and the climate change agendas, which tend to stay a little technical, and they don't really want to go near issues of land tenure because these are highly politically charged issues. But you can see from Sina's remarks that land tenure actually helps to upgrade settlements, improve infrastructure, help people gain access to credit, and so on. Thanks so much, Sina, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but let's go to Sonia Fadrigo, another urban example from the Homeless Poor Federation in the Philippines. And let's put her video on.
I am Sonia Fadrigo, a community leader and the founding member of the Homeless People's Federation Philippines, a member affiliate of SDI. We have a membership of at least 50,000 families, comprised of 102 local community associations all over the country. I started to involve myself in the community organizing and became one of the active community leaders because we were confronted with court-ordered eviction and demolition way back in 1994. In 2008, my city was hit by a devastating typhoon, Typhoon Frank, and many people died and thousands lost their housing and possessions. Most of them were informal settlers living on the riverbanks. Even before that disaster, the mayor, with help from the Japanese Development Agency, had started a big flood protection project that had envisaged resettlement to nearby land that the local government had set aside through land banking. But people had been reluctant to move. Their livelihoods and social networks were linked to the river and the city center. But the disaster changed their views. We started to organize them and were able to create many alliances with the local government, national agencies, and international NGOs. First, we built some temporary housing for those most in need. And then, step by step, we built a whole community with decent housing for families affected by the disaster. We have collaborated with universities and foundations and our network of young architects to find cost-effective and innovative ways to build houses. These houses can withstand typhoon winds and is in line with the Philippines Building Code. And constructing these houses emits 80% less greenhouse gases than conventional materials being used. Today, representative of the Homeless People's Federation Philippines sit in various local government committees. Our views are asked when it comes to flood protection and land use planning, city shelter plan, annual investment plan, local economic development, and other development issues of the city. Of course, everything is political and a question of constant negotiation. Change is slow, incremental, and difficult, and there are never enough resources to achieve everything that needs to be done. Different organizations that are our member networks, such as the Asian Coalition for Housing Rights and Slum Dwellers International, have enabled people to organize and to learn. People are driving people-centered development by generating our own finance, our own information, by collectively negotiating for land and housing, and by linking these processes with all the other key stakeholders. With regards to resilience, I would like to say on behalf of our stakeholder group of grassroots here, as cities, we need to not just focus on large physical infrastructure to reduce such risks as flooding brought about by climate change, but invest our resources in developing people's awareness and skills so people can anticipate and prepare for disasters. On technology, a good example of technology is data gathering that supports people's claims and is recognized by government. SDI's Know Your City initiative is a great example that combines digitized open source technologies with community mapping processes where communities were involved. Look at what we have achieved. We are not the enemy. What we need is space and opportunity. Trust us, enable us, and engage us. and together we will tackle climate change issues. Because we the people are ready to partner and work for our own development and be ready for a change. The question is, are you ready?
Fantastic remarks by Sonia Fadrigo from Homeless People's Federation in Philippines. And among many other things, she's also talking about the idea that resilience and adaptation needs the communities to be organized. It needs communities to collect and own data, to understand, to create technologies that work for communities. And that needs to be, some people call it soft infrastructure, but that's as vital as the hard infrastructure that governments are invested in. And she's also talked a lot about how there are different planning mechanisms that are available for government, for communities to use, and they've been doing that in collaboration with local governments. And finally, I liked very much her slogan, "We are not your enemies." So a big effort put in by communities to show that they are partners and not the enemies, and not adversarial with government. And of course, she started also by saying it's all very political, something that often the technical agencies and policymakers shy away from when engaging with local communities. Thanks so much for very valuable remarks there. And I'm sorry she hasn't been able to join us, but she's not been well. And the last speaker on the panel for civil society members is Cherry Barnuevo, Secretary General of Solidarity of the Oppressed Filipino People. She's based in the megacity Manila. Go ahead, Cherry.
Hi, Saranjana. Hello, everyone. My name is Cherry Barnuevo. I am the Secretary General of Solidarity of Oppressed Filipino People. We are formerly known as Damayanang Maralit ng Pilipinong Api, or DAMPA. We are located in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, and we have 67 member community-based organizations in the Philippines. In 2016, we have a project with ADB in partnership with the Huairou Commission. In this project, we empowered the grassroots women in Sitio Kislap, Barangay Fairview, Quezon City. In this project, we have trained grassroots women to do community risk assessment. We have trained them to do risk mapping in their area. And through this project, they were able to tell their barangay chairperson that their area is part of the high-risk area. They have shown their drone. They drew a map using a Crayola and a pencil in a Manila paper, and then we presented this to the chairperson. And then with so many and series of barangay council consultation, FGDs with the barangay council, the barangay chairperson have realized that this area is part of the high-risk area. So that's why they are flooded. And then after that series of consultation, the barangay chairperson presented that idea and get the approval of the Quezon City then Mayor Herbert Bautista. So a budget has been approved for the building of a riprapping in that area to prevent flooding. Because of that training with our partners from the Huairou Commission and ADB, we were able to realize that we should be also economically empowered to be able to face the disaster and other emergencies in our barangays. Because of that, we implemented a project and strengthened the community savings in all our community organizations, and implemented the rice bank, wherein we store rice. In case of emergency, we have available food for everyone. And then after that, we need to scale up that project. So after that project, we implemented the food bank, wherein we have a small grocery store wherein all our members are buying the everyday consumption, and then they have profit sharing. And because of that because of the trainings and capacity building from our partners, we were able to get the network. And now, September 2021, we were able to get the grant from Department of Labor and Employment, 1 million pesos grant. And we have used that 1 million pesos to add capital to our existing food bank. That project is located in Barangay Capino, Valiches, Quezon City. And now we call that ANAC, Alyansa ng Nakatatanda sa Komunidad Organization, ANAC Food Bank. So we now have, incoming this December, we will be profit sharing 2,800 283,000 pesos for the profit sharing because of the 2016 project with ADB. So what we are suggesting is for us to be able, the grassroots women leaders, to be able to embottle the disaster, the climate change. We should be economically empowered for us to be focused on how the trainings on all the capacity building from our international INGOs partners, from government agency trainings, we will be able to focus on that and grasp and be able to realize what are those trainings if we are economically empowered.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So Cherry is bringing up the importance of being economically empowered and economically resilient, which is what the food banks are. The need to demonstrate things before they can be scaled up with the government. And also she has talked about right in the beginning of her example, the idea that communities have this hyper local data, which is often not there with governments. And so when they map, they bring up these issues of highly localized risk, which they can then use to negotiate with government. And the idea that the barangay and communities have gone together to get resources to the municipality is another piece that I hope that you could hear. So with that, we come to the end of our panel with the grassroots and civil society speakers. And let's go to our policy makers, whom we have the privilege to have here. I first want to introduce Pak Yoga. Suprayoga Hadi is the Deputy Policy Support and Human Development in the Vice President's Office of the Government of Indonesia. Pak Yoga, it's really a great privilege for us to have you here with us. We know that you have a lot of experience in disaster management, then at Bapinas, and now you're focused more on poverty reduction. So I think that's ideal for our discussion. So please share your reflections. Thank you. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Suranjana. It's my pleasure actually to be participating in this very interesting topic on the climate resilience of the local community. Okay, I will try to actually review the presentation from Amie and Bu Roniatun from Indonesia. Of course, you know very well about how YAKKUM is very much assisting the community level in the village and also kelurahan level in Indonesia, especially in poverty, as well as how the women organization also participating actively in disaster as well as the climate change resilience. And also from Cambodia, I think Sina already presenting quite interesting on the basis of like the what we call the land tenure, as well as how we try to make the land as the capital or the modality actually for making the community resilience in the field level. And of course, Sonia and Sherry in the Philippines case is very much related with how the CDD actually, the community-driven development, is very much required actually to support and also to strengthen how the local community is participating actively in the climate change adaptation as well as resilience. So I'll try to make the case of those issues, how Indonesian actually try to cope with the issue of the climate resilience locally. Since maybe about 9 years ago, in 2012, we have already introduced what we call the program Kampung Iklim, what we call the village climate program, which is very, very interesting actually, how the kampung or the village in Indonesia already been something like assigned, yeah, initially by the government actually, or initiated by the government to establish the what we call the climate village program in trying to be more adaptive, as well as how to mitigate actually the issue of the climate change locally, and how the community actually will be participating actively and proactively actually in making the adaptation as well as the mitigation. For instance, like controlling like drought, flood, the landslides in the case of hydrometeorological disaster, as well as improving the food security, as well as maybe we know about the climate related diseases also need to be well adapted. And also in the mitigation case, some activities like the waste, solid and liquid waste management, it's very, very much related with how the poor people or the community level need to be well managed by themselves. And also the renewable energy and also energy conservation is also very much promoted actually in the local level. Even like the agriculture cultivation, as well as like the low gas emission is also very much related with this initiatives. And also vegetation cover to be increased, as well as the forest and land fire prevention and control, because the land fire and the forest fire is very much also problems in several parts of Indonesia. So I'll try to jump into the three questions that already been proposed by Huairou Commission in this session. The value of collaboration is very much important in climate change resilience as well as disaster resilience. We've already been very committed actually in promoting what we call the pentahelix. The pentahelix is very much related with collaborative working. We are talking about the government as well as the local government, and also the village government actually. Second one is the community, like the NGOs, like how YAKKUM is very much engaged in this program very long time ago. And then the third one is what we call the private sector, which is very important because we are talking about how to scaling up also the investment for climate resilience. And then the fourth one is the academician, the universities, the local experts, and also local research center is also well engaged in this issue. And then finally is the media. Media is also very important, how to change the habit, change the the way the people dealing with the climate and disaster is very, very important. And then the second one about this scaling up the investment is also I think related with what the government already promoting, what we call the Dana Desa or the village fund, like what Sherry and also Sonia mentioned about the barangays in the Philippines. Indonesia already been promoting what we call the not really the land or village banking, but or rural banking, but we call it the Dana Desa. It means the village fund. The village fund is actually allocated by the central government for the village in almost 80,000 villages all over the nation, and the decision is theirs. How the decision is making is from the planning process, like what Amie and Bu Romiatun talking about the planning process from the community level, and then going up to the district level, and then the national level. But in the village level, they have their own decision-making process actually on how they use up the village fund more productively, including how they prevent and how to mitigate the climate change and also disaster by themselves. So this is going to be very, very important actually, how they make the village fund more productively in making the resilience much stronger and much strengthened actually in the village level. And then finally, I think on your the question on how the government is dealing with the COP26, which is now still ongoing in Glasgow. I think that is very important that all the budget from the government already been we have the taking actually the budget from the government side. Since from the central level, provincial level, we have also at the kabupaten level and district and municipal level to take actually the budget for the climate resilience, including for the adaptation as well as for the mitigation of the climate change in the local level, nationally as well at the provincial level. So it means that the investment for resilience is already been committed from the government, and then from every single layer of the government, we already been taking actually the budget for the climate resilience. So I think that's information that I should share in this session. Thank you, Suranjana.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Pak Yoga. I take away from your comments the two very important things that you talked about, the collaboration, which is critical, which we have to invest in, and you have talked about specific mechanisms for collaboration that you have in Indonesia, but also the decentralized mechanism that you have in terms of the village fund as a resource, and then you have the village decentralized planning process. And I think that Amie and Roniatun's remarks have to do with how do people get empowered to actually enter and influence those processes. So I also like very much your very concrete remark about the need for budget tagging so that governments can actually count how much is being invested in climate change. So that's very concrete. Thank you so much. And now I have the privilege of introducing Yukiko Ito. She's the Principal Social Development Specialist in the Social Development Thematic Group on Sustainable Development and Climate Change in the Asian Development Bank. Welcome, Yuki. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that you have a lot of expertise also in community-driven development and in social protection. But before you start, I'm going to read out a comment from the chat, which you might have seen from Sheila Patel, who's the founder of Slum Dwellers International. She says the ADB is based in Manila, and Philippines organizations are the leaders in their experience of addressing disasters. And there needs to be ways in which this experience from the Philippines and other countries create an architecture for global and local partnerships to address emergencies. So in case you wanted to say anything about that in your remarks, I just wanted to read that out. Please go ahead, Yuki. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me today and for all the discussions that I heard from the panelists, which I learned a lot, and it was pretty much exciting experiences and also cases about this community-led adaptation measures. And I've tried to put in some of the slides, some of the key takeaways for this session. So perhaps we can move to the next slide, please. I would like to start with the fundamental question on what is the value for working with the communities and the women's group. First of all, there is a need to ensure that the investment, whatever investment, will be explicitly focused on the poor and the vulnerable in the communities who are the ones that are disproportionately exposed to natural hazards and climate change, as we heard throughout many of the stories today. And also the localized disaster and climate risks faced by the communities on a daily basis will require a certain set of local knowledge to address them. And the communities are the best to make such decisions on how to resolve these localized issues. And therefore, to improve the investment impact of whatever investment you are making, the community must be the integral part and the centerpiece of the resilience building measures. Next, please. So where the investment is needed the most? The investments in resilience building measures is critical absolutely critical in reducing the lives of the people themselves, as well as reducing the loss of the community and household asset that exists in that locality. These resilience building investment would include several of the things. One would be community infrastructures. It must be resilience, and it could perhaps be integrating some factors of disaster proofing technologies in it. And second one is livelihood. It must be resilience to address the underlying vulnerability of the poor and the vulnerable within that community. And lastly, thirdly, disaster preparedness activities that I've heard a lot through the discussions today to manage the risks which are left, which we, which we probably need to amplify the good practices a little bit more of such measures. Next, please. So what would require for scaling up community-led adaptation measures? I see through the discussions three important areas. The first one is partnership with other stakeholders, not only the communities can do so much. Second is the capacity building of the community. We also heard about this through many of the examples today. And thirdly, it's absolutely important, like today, to showcase and scale up good practices. Next, please. So first, about why strategic partnership. This is important because the community can only do so much by themselves, and they will be needing to strategically link up with the other partners, such as what we've also heard with the national or even local governments, the NGOs who are working in the area, or the donor agencies, if there are, and also private sectors, and all need to collaborate together and to link up with the community to build the resilience measures. And in doing so, community must learn how to navigate through the government bureaucracies, local or national, to find an opportunity of an entry point to be able to work with different partners, and important to leave a legacy of the value of the community as the strategic partners. Next, please. Second, there is a need to invest a lot in community capacity. Building local capacities in using community climate and disaster risk information is absolutely important. And I think we heard a couple of times mentioning about this. And to do this, the community will need to understand the risks that they face, but not only using the scientific information such as the hazard map available on that geographical space, but also to reflect on what the communities know, the traditional and local knowledge that exists in that area, to come together to make a proper assessment, a localized assessment. And such community-led assessments can inform the local governments or the national governments on the climate and disaster resilience priorities to be able to secure funding from the local or national governments. Next, please. And then taking every opportunity, like we are trying to do for today, to showcase good community-led practices. This is important to demonstrate and to amplify widely the effective development impact. And another thing is the fastest way to scale up, and I think we also heard from Yoga today, that the community-led adaptation measures that you are doing, and if there are good practices, to integrate into existing large-scale government programs. And perhaps it would be existing large-scale government poverty reduction programs, because it will reach automatically the poor and the vulnerable in the communities. And these national wide-range government programs, if you ride on these, you will be able to saturate throughout the country, or if you can also saturate across the region. Which would include social protection programs or community-driven development programs, rural development or rural or urban informal settlement, community forestry, or whatever it may be, that will allow to tackle both the poverty reduction at the same time the climate and disaster resilience. Next, please. So finally, what can we say to the governments at COP26? First of all, the disaster and climate change is threatening the gains achieved so far for poverty reduction in Asia and Pacific, especially as the poor and the most vulnerable communities are disproportionately impacted by shocks and stresses. And number two, the community-led adaptation is the best strategy to address the localized disaster and climate risk through by integrating the local and traditional knowledge that the communities would have. And thirdly, incorporating these community-led adaptation strategies becomes an opportunity for the government, and this is very important from the viewpoint of the government. It becomes an opportunity for the government to strengthen the impact of their investment as part of a very important transformational approach to this climate and disaster resilience. Next, please. That's all. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Yuki. You went through all the points very systematically and, of course, talked about this idea of amplifying good practice, and you talked about the importance of capacity, which has come up again and again, and particularly strengthening people's local knowledge, their ability to navigate institutional arrangements, partnership, the idea that good practice should be scaled up and integrated with larger government programs. Just some of the things I picked up from your comments. Now, we have about 15 minutes left, and I thought we'd have a more sort of free-flowing discussion. You know, one of the things that keeps coming up in our work, I think, is the communities are doing something. I think institutions appreciate that work. As Yuki just pointed out, this work needs to be amplified and it needs to be integrated with larger government programs. The government has good programs in place, as we heard from Park Yoga, but somehow sometimes these don't reach the most vulnerable communities. So invariably, there is this gap. And Yuki, you also mentioned this idea of navigating government arrangements, but that's really quite hard for the most vulnerable groups. So I was wondering if any of the panelists wanted to come in and make a few, any comments in response to that before we go to the chat shower and the final recommendation. So I was wondering if anyone wants to speak to this idea of this gap between good government programs and replicable, scalable strategies on the community side, and where do they fall through, and what are the lessons we've learned about connecting them together? Any takers from the panel? Just speak for a few minutes. I would request that you keep your remarks short so we can get some input from different people. But anyone wants to come in on this question of bridging this gap between government and grassroots initiatives? Where should the investment go? Why do we get stuck? What can we do better over here? Can I come to you, Park Yoga, for some response to this question?
Okay, thank you, Srajana. I think it's going to be very good to summarize, generally about, and I agree with Yukiko's presentation that we need to actually try to make sure that the participation, the collaboration is can be much more equally actually. So the government is not the only actor actually behind this responsibility, but we try to make sure that the partnership is promoted actually along with of course the responsibility is going to be also decentralized, because if we are talking about disaster, it's everybody business. Climate change is also everybody business. So it means that we try to make sure that the concern is everywhere actually, and going to everybody actually in these matters. So how the people from the grassroots, for instance, like the women, organization, and also women communities, the community at the local level is much more, be responsible actually, rather than at the central government, for instance. Because the government cannot do anything and just doing like the direction or doing some policy, but the real deal is local people. So how to strengthen the local people, how to empower the local people is, I think, the key actually, including how they also be participating in, investing in the climate resilience is very, very important. Thank you, Sanjana.
Thank you. Yuki, any remarks to add around this issue of these gaps and how we might try and bridge these gaps around how communities can navigate institutional arrangements?
Well, in short, I've already mentioned in my presentation, but the gap is between the top down and the bottom up. And
right.
That's where the gap is, and it's not merging. But I do believe what Pak said about the functional difference between every stakeholder should function, and all should be collaborating in partnership ideally, which is different. But fundamentally, moving from trying to secure the budget of what the community-led adaptation need would be, that would require amplifying and demonstrating the good efforts that you all are doing, which government is really, really hungry to listen to those initiatives. Thank you.
Wow, it's good to know government is hungry to listen to those initiatives, because many groups on the ground are hungry to engage with government, and often it's hard to find mechanisms to do that. But before we go to our recommendation part of the discussion again with the audience who's present here, I just want to take a moment to honor the memory of Dinky Solomon, who passed away just a few weeks ago. And she was a feminist and a lifelong activist who trained most of the Filipino organizers who we know, but she had 2 terms in the government as the Secretary for Social Welfare and Development. And during this period, she did some pioneering work around creating formal institutional policy mandates to engage local communities in both disaster management as part of the distribution of relief, identification of vulnerable households, as well as monitor the conditional cash transfer program in the Philippines. So those are some of the lessons we take away from her work in the Philippines. So with that, let me go to our audience, and let's have the chat shower. Let's ask the first question: where do you believe investment is most needed? Where is investment most needed in order to scale up locally led adaptation or make adaptation work for the most vulnerable communities? So write down your answer in the chat, but don't don't press enter. Just write down the answer, and let's wait till everybody has it written. Let's wait a couple of minutes, and then we'll say go, and everybody say and put enter in at the same time, and we'll see everybody's remarks on that. Okay, so that's the chat shower we learned from IIED and the Red Cross. So everybody write down, where do you think investment is most needed, most urgently, and then just wait a couple of minutes, and when I say go, just press enter so we can see all your responses at the same time. So so let's give that a moment. And we had a lot of suggestions from people around capacity, what communities need to learn, what governments need to do, how we might try and bridge these gaps, what kinds of learning are in place. And I'm happy to say that the ADB's Community Resilient Partnership Program hopefully is intended precisely for some of these things, to bring together the variety of stakeholders from the communities to the national governments and bring them together and see how they can develop solutions that amplify and accelerate locally led adaptation in partnership with government programs. So let's go to, okay, go. Let's see, where is investment most needed? What do people have to say on this? So, Soni Woods from ADB says women's organizations who are massively underfunded at the moment need resources, I guess, so that they can engage in capacity building and bring together community solutions. And we heard from Amie that women's solutions are not only for women themselves, but for the larger community. Cherry says invest in grassroots women's capacity to develop networking and be able to do proposals and speak for themselves. Flexible funding for to initiate and strengthen resilience practices. So the flexible funding is important. Organized community groups, especially women's groups, to lead innovative practices. So we have Sina says government could have clear plans for development and participation by the community so that they can influence community development plans too, right? And so we have capacity building for local governments and civil society. So it's not just communities, but local governments and civil society who need capacity building. And a lot of partnership work is really about learning to work with one another and understand the capacities that different stakeholders bring to the table. That's why collaboration takes a long time and needs a lot of investment. So we have government should conduct risk assessments on climate impact. Okay, so that's where people are talking about investment being needed. How should this investment be designed and shaped? Any suggestions on how should investment be designed and shaped? Some of you might prefer to answer the question on what should we be saying to governments at COP. I think Park Yoga gave a very practical suggestion, more budget tagging. What do you think on what should we be saying to officials who are meeting and negotiating the next agreement on climate change at COP26? And so type out your answer and just wait a minute. What should we be saying to them? And do you want to make any suggestions around the idea of, or the question of how should investment be designed? So not only is investment urgent, and many of you have suggested where it should go, how do you think this should be designed? What are some elements that should shape the mechanism in order to deliver the impact on the ground that you really want to see? So, okay, if everyone's ready, let's go. Say enter and share your response. So Amie says start with community-led risk assessments and then prioritize action. So you need the hyper-local data that comes out of local communities, excuse me, mapping their risk before you do the planning and set priorities. Listen to grassroots. So I take that to mean we need more mechanisms for government and grassroots to interact. And sometimes the mechanisms exist, but we have to demonstrate how they can be used. And we need a lot of collaborative work, which is sometimes outside the institutional framework, in order to show and demonstrate how those mechanisms can work. National governments should go directly to communities. So we're saying that communities need to have ways to also talk to the national government, not just local government. Okay. So we now have quite a lot of suggestions there, but if I can take the last few minutes and perhaps summarize some of the recurring ideas that I've been hearing in this discussion before we close this session. Let me start by saying that, first of all, we can see from the work of communities that there has been a lot of investment over long periods of time and long time frames in order to solve problems. There's been substantial trial and error and experimentation, which are vital for problem solving at the grassroots level. So in a sense, we are saying that climate investment needs to resonate with that. It needs to be responsive to this idea that we don't have all the answers, and some experimentation and trial and error is very important, particularly as policymakers often use the term innovation, right? So we hear a lot about innovation, but people do not want to take risks, and no one wants to risk failure. But this is very important, and therefore money that goes in for developing solutions needs to deal with this. The idea that flexible funding is important for women's groups and communities. They need to set local priorities based on local information. The importance of mechanisms that allow decentralized planning, which is present in many countries in Southeast Asia. We heard from the Indonesian examples, there are mechanisms in place. We need to make sure that local groups and communities are able to access these mechanisms. We also heard about the need to build capacities of communities and women's groups. They need resources to do that. They have to learn to create evidence, to gather data, to map risks, to engage with local governments, to engage with other entities, learning about collaboration is vital, whether that is collaboration between civil society and communities and government, local government, different levels of government, private sector, universities. All these need to come together to amplify impacts. We saw also the work that's being done around slum upgrading and access to land tenure. The issues we heard about, issues around relocation, the cost-effective slum upgrading and housing that communities are doing, the long-term commitment, the idea that they're making governments more efficient, where they're working with government programs to deliver impact more effectively. So there's a huge contribution they're already making to climate change. We have to try and leverage these in order to scale up impact. We had the very critical recommendation around budget tagging, so that we can transparently count and see what investments are already being made by governments in climate change. And the idea also that we, as part of amplifying impacts, we need communities and women's groups to learn to navigate government arrangements and try and integrate good practices into large-scale programs. And basically, I think the underlying notion that development and the SDGs are actually just the other side of climate change and disaster risk reduction. These are not the problem or challenges or solutions to be found with one stakeholder. All stakeholders need to collaborate closely in order to find solutions that work for everyone. So with that, I'm going to thank everyone who joined us. Thank you so much. Thank you very much to the audience who came and stayed and listened and were actively engaged in the chat. And we hope that this is not the last discussion with you. We hope to keep picking up this discussion with you in the coming months and hearing more from you, developing our own thinking and understanding, and developing more opportunities for collaboration with one another, with governments, with local governments, with communities, NGOs, and researchers. We hope to learn from one another as we keep advancing and scaling up and refining the work that's already underway in scaling up locally led adaptation. So big thank you to all of you, Yuki, Pak Yoga, Kosina, Cherry, Amie, Ibu Ronyatun, and also Sonia Fadrigo, who didn't join us but shared her knowledge very generously. So big thanks to all of you for sharing your insights and for the fantastic work that you're doing. We hope to continue working with you. I see, Yuki, you have your hand raised. Did you? No, okay. So
no, I was just clapping.
All right. Oh, I didn't see that. I couldn't see that properly. I'm so sorry. Okay, so I really appreciate all of you coming together. It's been such a rich discussion and so many things to learn from it. I hope we can get together soon again, virtually, but also in person, I hope. And I hope that's not too far away. And thank you once again for your participation and for sharing your knowledge and learning. Bye and thank you.